and welcome to another episode of the 905er podcast with me, Roland Tanner.
I am Joel McLeod.
And this Thursday, we're welcoming a very special guest, Nick Paul, who's actually our amazing sound editor, who's edits our episodes most of the time very late at night when we get them to him at the last minute sometimes. But is also a undergraduate at Western University in his fourth year and a civil engineering degree. And we just thought there's been obviously been a lot of news, unusually for the sort of back to the new academic year at universities across Ontario. And we thought we'd take a look at that. There was news in the last week from McMaster in particular, but it's something that's kind of been 4 or 5 universities that have been in the news for various reasons. So we thought we'd ask Nick on, because he's been very much part of that process in the most positive way, I'm sure. But we thought his experience would be interesting. So welcome Nick to the podcast. We obviously know you already, but it's great to actually speak to you as a guest.
It's great to be here.
I mean, why don't we just kick off with you're in your fourth year. You've got experience of this, and actually, you said you took an internship for a year, so you're kind of, this is your fourth official year, but you're kind of fifth year of education through university in a way. How does this year compare to previous years of that kind of new academic year period?
It's familiar, but it's also very different. It's like, I can tell that, I wasn't in school last year. That was like COVID year. I was on a work term, but I can tell there's still like a lot of like that mentality around campus and stuff. It's like when I was in third year in 2019, like this year, there's still the events, there's still, in-person classes. They're trying to replicate as much as they could from 2019, but like this year it feels very different. It feels distinctly like there's like a new layer of almost like dread hidden amongst like everything and everyone. And it's just like, I don't know. It feels like they're trying to replicate something and they're striving to get there, but haven't quite done it yet. And it's just really weird all around.
I'm flashing back to my days in university, and the attitude. I don't know. I'm trying to think, like the attitude was. I'm thinking like all the stories that we're hearing of just kind of this. It's almost like this pent up angst that's being unleashed at university, and I'm trying to think of the right wording for this, and the words are escaping me. But there's, if you think about, like, these students have had a year of staying at home. If you're thinking about, they were told in high school, okay, you're going to graduate, go on to university. In some cases, they made plans to travel across the province, maybe across the country, to attend your school, Western, or here in the 905 Mac, Brock, U of T, wherever have you. And last year, they were kind of denied that because of COVID. A lot of kids had to stay home for health reasons. Obviously, lockdowns. Schools were not decide we're going to do all of our classes online, and so be it. Is there a feeling of like wanting to play catch up by the student population of, kind of a year was lost and we want to take it back? Is that kind of the attitude amongst maybe some of your younger peers on campus?
Yes, to put it in a word, 100%. Like, for some context, I'm what's called a SOF. So at Western, we have what are SOFs, which are student leaders. Like at most schools across the country, there's DONs in residence, like the upper year student that lives on the floor, helps acclimatize the kids to residence. At Western, we have two groups. We have DONs and SOFs. DONs, the way the university says it is, DONs are the physical support and SOFs are the mental support. And that's how it is. Every first year student has 2 SOFs, one faculty SOF and one resident SOF. And so in my second year, I was a resident SOF. I lived on the floor. I got to know the kids like that. And third year, then fourth year internship. And this year I'm a faculty SOF. So that means I'm kind of helping the students transition from high school to university. All right, so there's a little bit of context on that. Now, I'm on a team of softs, engineering softs. There's 60 to 64 of us, actually, exactly. And there's a lot of second years on that team. And it became, I'd say throughout orientation week, there became to be a sort of stigmatism that the second year softs were just first years. Because, these second year softs, they didn't have an O week. They didn't, O week being frosh week, the first week of school, all the events. There was the stigmatism that all of these second year softs were really just first years, and a lot of the upper years on the team had to take double the work for that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But there definitely, to answer your question, is that feeling of we got to make up for lost time.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting fact that really, I don't think it's actually been kind of reported in the press, is that structure of campus life. And I get it. I remember the idea was like you had these kind of the senior classes kind of mentoring the younger classes into university life. But I find that interesting that the university just seems to kind of want to go, it didn't take that into account. That structure that you have an entire one first year class that really did not have your typical campus lifestyle, and they themselves don't know they didn't have that year to adjust to living away from home, budgeting them their finances, budgeting their time for class, recreation, extracurricular, all that stuff. They were still stuck, literally in some cases, stuck in their bedrooms for the first year of university, and then the university kind of relies on them to say, "No, you go tell this incoming class, this is how life is supposed to work now that you're away from home." Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that hurdle as you've seen it? We're now a month into the class or school year. What can you maybe say some of the hurdles or some of the problems that you've seen arise because of that?
Yeah, so I actually have a very firsthand experience in this because my younger sister was a first year last year.
Okay.
So Western, there's kind of when I come back to Milton, I'm from Milton if I didn't mention that. When I come back to Milton and talked to a lot of my friends over the summer, there was really that feeling that the first years, so last year's first years at Western were really lucky. Because at Western, residence was still open. Western was one of the only schools where residence was still open fully. And, although in-person classes weren't happening, my sister, we're very grateful that she got to move to London, made a lot of great friends, got to have that experience and stuff. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to the acclimatization, like this year, there's a lot of the second years understand what it's like to be here, and they've been here, but they don't really know. Like they have like an idea of what it's like, but not what it's supposed to be like. So like for a concrete example, I was mentioning some people on the engineering soft team, right? These people have been around campus, they have lived here, they went to the cafeteria, managed their money and that kind of thing, like to a certain extent, but they had never been in the engineering buildings. So to try and ask these second years who had never been in the engineering buildings to show the first years where their classes were, it was just a massive struggle. On tour day in O week, we had to like give tours to some of the softs, which was weird. But
and so, I mean, the reason why I bring this up is obviously Western got in the press for a very bad reason at the start of the school year. I mean, I'm not going to ask you, what did you see? Because I don't think that's right. But I want to know, like, was the university prepared for this situation of literally two out of 4 years, 50% of your campus population essentially have no idea how university actually works, and the kind of and the whole. I'm not talking just in terms of classes. I'm talking the whole lifestyle, the whole living away from home. The freedom of not having mom and dad literally outside your door 24/7. Did you see that the school prepared for this situation in any shape, way, or form?
Yeah, I can offer some perspective in terms of that. There was, how do I phrase this without sounding, okay. There was a lot of decisions that were made by the university moving up, like coming up to O week, that a lot of, the 50% of us who had been there, a lot of us were very angry about. There was a lot of decisions that, like the biggest one, for example, is the university, in order to accommodate like for more COVID, like safety, like more spacing and stuff, the university removed all resident softs from residents and gave those rooms up to first years, higher incoming class, more people. It makes sense from a logistical standpoint, but for the mental health, getting these kids used to the new life kind of thing, when that decision was made, there was a lot of anger from the student body. And that's one, but it's kind of been a little bit of a laundry list of decisions the university's been making in terms of that a lot of upper years have been very angry about. No, yeah, it's just, it got to the point where I guess everyone here really knows about this, but I hasn't seen it reported anywhere on socials or anything like that. The final closing ceremonies at Western, usually this big event, engineering built a cannon that we were going to fire, for heaven's sake. Every soft team protested it. Every soft team canceled their cheer, stood up, held up a megaphone, and said, "Western, keep us safe," and then sat back down. So there's a lot of anger from the upper year student body, which honestly has really just kind of dissipated since O week. In O
Really?
week, go.
So, I mean, just to sort of clarify what you're saying there. So this was the more senior students feeling that the university had at least somewhat let you down, let you all down in not allowing the usual kind of process, the responsible process of induction into university year, if you like, rather than the crazy partying stuff.
Exactly.
To go ahead. Okay, well that is a perspective I haven't heard before. So that's interesting.
There's a lot of, specifically at Western, there's been a lot of anger towards the administration. We organized that 10,000 student march. There's a lot of, now there's weekly town halls regarding Western equity and diversity. There's a lot of lessons that the student body has tried to, there's a lot of lessons that have been learned now by the organization that a lot of the student body kind of like, were like trying to warn Western off.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, and I mean, obviously, so, I mean, I'll just explain to listeners, we're not going to go into the specifics of the allegations that were made about sexual assault, just because it's a whole legal area. We neither want to not believe the women's what has been said by the women, nor kind of just not touch that area. I think is probably the best way of approaching it for us, because particularly, we're just not qualified really to discuss it. However, I think one thing we are qualified to discuss is the kind of how the university prepares to make sure that these kind of things don't happen. And one thing I was thinking of as well, when someone comes to a university, is there any kind of other than from other students, is there kind of like almost like a rule book of these are the things which are acceptable and unacceptable in students? New students having that kind of rite of passage of being away from home for the first time. That's a huge part of being at university, and I don't think anybody would ever want to take that away. But in terms of how male students interact with female students, things like that, there's obviously some really important things that you kind of feel like should be part of the introduction to university these days that weren't in my day. I know that, but maybe should be now. Does that kind of thing happen at all?
I'm very glad you brought that up, because there has been, and Western has Western has actually been championed as having one of the best orientation consent education systems every year until this year. Every year there has been a speaker who's come to Western University, and it's been on the Tuesday of orientation week. It's been one of the mandatory events that all first-year students go to, in which I forget the gentleman's name, but he's hilarious. He's a comedian, and he makes a very good consent conversation. It's called Can I Kiss You? And I remember in first year, it had a really big impact on me because it was the first time I'd ever seen conversations like that had at such a large scale. It was the first time that, that kind of thing had ever really been talked about with, I guess you're right. We're saying almost like a sort of rule book kind of helping these kids, these specifically like men, acclimatize to the new environment they're in. But this year, it didn't happen. And this year it was, or rather it did happen, but it was optional and over Zoom, and attendance was very, very, very low.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah.
What is, from what you can see, I mean, the school has made a pledge to reform its image. Western has the consensus as being a party school, for lack of a better phrase, in Canada. The administration has made a pledge to kind of review that or reform that image. So far, have they? Do you think that they're taking it seriously to reform it, or are they actually putting the goodwill forward to reform it, or is this more, are you just seeing kind of a lot of talk, not a lot of walk?
Oh, again, you're asking like I got to give you two answers. I got to give you the pre-COVID answer and the post-COVID answer, right?
Sure.
Pre-COVID, I saw a significant change. From my first year, my second year being 2018, I was a different kind of soph. I was a resident soph at that point. And there was a lot of effort put in both by the administration and the City of London to kind of, I wouldn't say as much as like stop the student body, but there was a lot of alternative programming put in place. Western kind of created a lot of different options and different programming, and really tried to put a simmer on that. And I think it was great. But this year, with everything that's happened, it's kind of, everything's just been basically thrown to the wind. In the last month, there's been a lot of everything, and there's a lot of feelings and anxieties on campus that I don't know how the university is going to address. I don't know if they're going to do a good job at addressing it, but my confidence in the school, based on the decisions that I've seen in the last, the decisions I saw pre-O week and up to O week, my confidence in the school to kind of dispel this Western party school myth has gone right out the window.
What do you think the school needs to do to change that?
What do I think they need to do? I think they're taking a lot of the right steps, honestly. I think that, with the latest, the school's latest policies on gender-based violence and bringing that to the forefront and kind of taking the negative images that are in everyone's psyche and trying to have conversations about that, I think that's good. But I think that it's kind of difficult because you're asking a post-mortem question, but I think that a lot of the things that needs to happen at Western is there needs to be a lot of more than just conversations and more than just creating policies and creating different support systems. There needs to be some kind of pre-plan. And I know that before this year, pre-COVID, I don't even know if it's happening post-COVID. That's a different bag of worms entirely. But there's an idea among students on campus that Western is taking COVID more seriously than like everything else. And because of that, a lot of the other social services on campus are really suffering because of that. And I brought that up because the big thing is at Western, there was a service called the Foot Patrol, which one of my best friends actually volunteered for. And it was really cool. And it was just kind of, if you wanted to like walk home with someone, you called Foot Patrol and they would walk home with you. So I think Western needs to like take a step to create services like that to prevent things from happening rather than working on the postmortem, the policies for reporting, the policies for talking in. They need to take steps to fix things. The biggest one would have putting softs, not removing softs from residents. It was just, that was it. I hated that decision and everyone hated that, but that's fine. That's fine.
Well, yeah, that presence of kind of more experienced peers is a really sort of,
Exactly.
it's a very long tradition of kind of bringing people into a new situation. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good point about, because COVID is just dominating everything, that we forget that, well, no, we still need foot patrols and we still need our experienced students to be, bringing the new guys along. And I should just point out at this point that we tried to get speakers from McMaster as well. It was very short notice, and we particularly wanted to have a woman on as well. So we're very aware that the three guys discussing this topic is not the perfect list, but that's just the way it goes sometimes. So, but I mean, it seems to me that whole issue of kind of, I certainly wish that when I went to university back in the Stone Ages, that there had been that kind of introduction to, this, you're an adult now, you're interacting in ways that you couldn't get away with a year ago, which now are completely legal and allowed. And this is, that really kind of detailed education on consent and things like that just seems so incredibly important that to kind of drop the ball on that this year is really extremely regrettable, and it's. Do you think the expectations or the demands on you as students at this time in history are kind of tougher than they were in say my dim and distant past? I mean, do you think there used to be a kind of toleration and to an extent of like, well, students will be students and it's the first week back and stuff? I mean, do you think it's it's almost like you've got more kind of, for better or worse, rules surrounding you about what's allowed and what's reasonable behavior?
It's different. It's very different than, I know you're around my dad's age, Roland, and he often tells me about times back when he was still in university. I'm sorry. He tells me often about the differences between like what he's seeing in my life and what I'm experiencing in my life. And the one that's always stuck with me is social media. Like, if one of the biggest accounts at Western University, other than Western University official, is there's a social media account on Instagram and Twitter and probably everything else called Western Savages, which is one of the. It's great. It's comedy and it's funny, but if anything happens on campus, we all know about it. And I feel like that's definitely an added layer of pressure on the student mentality beyond just like school and stuff. The idea that, oh, you don't want to mess up like bad, or you might end up on Western Savages. Like, you don't want to be that person at the big street party who's getting thrown off the roof because, you'll end up on Western Savages and everyone will know about it. You'll never get away from it, which is definitely definitely a layer of pressure, which I feel like, talking about what we were talking about before, I feel like I can think of a lot to do with like women and stuff that would be very much more, for lack of a better term, a lot more like visible and stuff because of social media, which could cause a lot of problems and make things more difficult in that sense. Yeah.
It's certainly a whole other world. Yeah. I mean, I didn't even have a computer until I was a postgrad.
I'm just looking at the time here, and I see we're a few minutes early. It might be an early night for us, but I think we can wrap it up there for the evening, because that's all my questions I have for you, Nick. But it's good to talk with you about this and just the unique nature of kind of back to university for in the I guess close to the post-COVID era is a lot of new challenges that I don't think anyone anticipated going back to school this year.
One of my nieces is going through university in Britain at the same time, and it really, it can't be underestimated the extent to which the normal experience has been lost for you guys. I mean, again, in Britain, degrees are 3 years, so if you lose a year and a half, that's of kind of being with people, being in residence, doing all that stuff. It's a fundamentally different experience then, which you still get your degree, but it's kind of, I mean, that rite of passage element, I guess, is it's going to be different for you for your generation in a way that you can't get back. It's but hopefully out of these experiences, some good things come for future years at all these universities, and we really appreciate you, Nick, coming on and giving us your perspective.
I appreciate being here. There's a lot of things that I have wanted to say, and I was able to say it on this podcast, and I hope that 905er listeners appreciate it as much as I have had enjoyment talking.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and it's certainly a really, because these stories are so often done from 1,000 miles high by people who are just people like me who are much older and have forgotten what it was like to be first year at university. So thanks so much, Nick, and we may have you on again in future episodes to talk about the student experience. Anyway, thanks for now, and we'll be back next week with more from the 905er.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns, or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.